Good evening and welcome back to the PrinceCast. I'm Michael Medeiros, and joining me today are two of our Prince columnists, David Mendelsohn Jr. and Alan Paltrow-Krulwich. We have three guys here, and we're going to be talking about feminism. So it's interesting that, perhaps unprecedented a couple decades ago to have only guys talking about feminism. But anyway, the whole reason for this was that David Mendelsohn wrote a column a couple weeks ago, sort of laying out a position that there are different types of feminists, at least. And the way it was portrayed was that there are two types of feminists.
So what I want to clarify from the get-go was that my article, now that I look back in the comments, it seemed like I was drawing more of a dichotomy than I actually was. There was one line in there where I said there seemed to be two major camps of feminists. That combined with the title I was given, because I unfortunately didn't choose my own title, which I should have, but it was two types of feminism. And that really didn't do justice to what I was trying to say. It made it seem like I was creating my own categories of feminism where I had no right to. And a lot of the responses, along with Lydia's column, had a lot to do with, oh, this guy Mendelsohn doesn't know about the second wave and third wave of feminism. And really, the categories I was drawing had nothing to do with those, and I wasn't precluding the existence of those. The two groups I was talking about aren't actually distinct groups like second wave and third wave. It's more like a spectrum between the extreme and non-extreme, and somewhere I believe that there is a line between talking about real issues and seeing non-issues as a personal offense.
Alan, how do you feel about certain issues being perceived as trivial versus non-trivial?
Well, I would definitely grant David his the characterization that he's not really drawing a dichotomy between two types. Just as it would be unfair to call an action like holding the door for somebody or helping with physical labor, just as it would be unfair to call that sexist or bad, it would also be somewhat unfair to call reaction or a taking of offense as wrong or bad. It is you need context when you criticize radicals who make people feel uncomfortable, because civil rights movement, the actual feminist movement, everybody, like, you can't integrate a school without the National Guard. Progressive policies for equality make people feel uncomfortable, they make people feel awkward, and they make people feel on guard, and that's the point. So, there might be a line, and we should debate about where it is, but it would be wrong to categorically reject debates about what is paternalism, what is making sexist assumptions. Those are important questions.
Certainly. So, David, what do you feel is the role of radicals? And if we are going to draw a line, what do you think would be on either side?
The key difference that I think I could draw up between back then, the suffrage movement, women's rights, all that stuff, in which case we certainly needed radicals. I think we're living in a different time, and I know that's going to be debated. People can draw up these statistics saying things are still uneven, and they are. But it's nothing like, the generations before us, like our parents and grandparents. And I feel like there's a certain extremity in what's being done wrong in order to justify an extreme response. There was that component, and there was also the fact that I don't believe that this extreme feminism is always instrumental. I feel that it comes up as feminists identify with the charge of feminism. In the example, in the anecdote I gave in my article, which was just an anecdote, I didn't mean for people to focus on it so much, and people were wondering why I was getting so pissed at this girl. It was, people are internalizing this type of feminism, and it really just didn't make sense to me. I was trying to grapple with it. Mm-hmm. It creates conflict between different people, between peers, between friends, as I pointed out. And yeah, I just wasn't sure how this global scale, the feminist movement as a whole, ever needed to come down to the personal level.
So I guess my response to that would be yes. There is an unprecedented amount of equality, or not just legally and politically, but also socially. There is nobody would be willing really to identify as a sexist or something, which could very well have been the case a while ago. So that I'll definitely grant you that. But I think the problem with a lack of overt sexism is that it makes it, you know, a lot easier to ignore what's left to fix. Now, you know, that means that people who have sexist opinions either do things that are, you know, paternalistic or whatever, or they just don't say their opinions. Now, I've had conversations at Princeton with people who legitimately think that, you know, women are inherently worse at math and science and should pick their majors accordingly. Now, they wouldn't make those, you know, I guess they think they're among the bros or they're among friends when they make those statements, but it's still very much real. Citing Caroline's first article, you know, I don't think anyone would deny that there are certain, you know, there is certain gender baggage with many of our, you know, social interactions here at the university and everywhere else. So to deny the progress that we've made would be ridiculous. I think that nobody is questioning that we've made an incredible amount of progress, but I think, you know, be it policy issues of, you know, the gap in wage earning, or, you know, social issues, I think there are still views that should be unacceptable that many people still have. However, I'm willing to concede the point that feminist kind of identity politics is, it's always troubling. To a certain degree, those types of politics are very useful advocacy-wise. They create a movement that self-identifies, is very cohesive, and without that movement, a lot of the advocacy and a lot of the hurdles that the feminist movement and the civil rights movement had to go through might not have happened.
You mentioned that one of the dangers is, no, correct me if I'm wrong in paraphrasing this, the danger is that it's hard to see now the very real kind of sexism that exists because it's not so overt. Is that more or less correct?
Well, I guess there's a trade-off between usefulness for advocacy and truth. Yes, identity politics would has the potential to cloud judgment in situations like the one that you outlined. I would agree with that. However, again, just like the term radical, I would defend it and its history as being a successful way of, you know, creating policy and social change thus far. So it complicates, you know, any question of branding one type of feminism as successful or not successful. I think it's complicated, and you're right to problematize certain aspects of feminist identity politics.
We can all acknowledge that there are still at least some vestiges of discrimination left. What would your approach be to getting rid of those, if not embracing the radical side of things?
Getting rid of what exactly
the remaining gender gap that we have statistics for.
While it's hard to find exactly which statistics are right, some will say that, yes, women earn less than men, but then others will say they earn less than men because of completely non-gendered reasons, because of maternal leave and that kind of thing, which then brings up, you know, a bunch of other questions regarding the fairness of the women having the children and ultimately stay home with, you know, the children the majority of the time. I don't think there is a contrived way we can really fix this other than to acknowledge the situation each group is in. And what I was kind of trying to get at in my article is that demonizing one side, and now I'm talking about extremists here, I'm not saying most people do this, but demonizing one side, I'm talking about the feminists who will, you know, say all men are pigs, or all men are, you know, say all guys in the street are just trying to hook up with someone instead of having some kind of conversation or something. It's hurting us. It's hurting the ultimate goals, which is to see gender as completely irrelevant. You know, at least in Princeton, in the Northeast of America, I would say something like that has happened very satisfactorily with religion. That although yes, we all have religious differences, I don't think we draw it out nearly as much as race or gender. Now, I don't think it is as relevant in our disagreements, and we realize it much less. And it's kind of in that direction that I would like to see gender to go. And what's happening, as I see it, isn't helping.
I guess I would agree with some of that sentiment. I think that the goal of feminism should not be to create this, you know, colorblind, gender-blind situation, because then we lose the vocabulary that we need to argue for gender-specific remedies to sexism. So just like you have, the colorblind arguments precluding affirmative action or any type of affirmative way of stopping past discrimination, which, regardless of what you think of any particular policy, past discrimination sometimes needs to be redressed with gender or race-specific counter policy, in my opinion. So I think that is not, equality is the goal. It's not necessarily a world without, gender specificity. I think that gender, unlike religion, is a very real distinction. It should not be real in the sense of political rights or social rights, but maternal leave is a very clear thing. A lot of people who are defending the status quo wage disparity would say, women give birth to children, they're out of the workforce, it's not de jure, it's not intentional sexism. I would say yes, that may be in part the case, although that stereotype can manifest itself intentionally. I think there's also de facto sexism, where if there is a systemic thing like maternal care that is setting back a gender, society has an obligation to kind of try to redress those even unintentional vestiges of sexism. So, for example, maternal and paternal care, because I know many house husbands who have, chosen to, well, I also know many, gay couples for which gender norms is not particularly helpful. But my point being that when we lose the language and the vocabulary that we've gained from the feminist movement and try to trade it in for genderless utopia, we lose the ability to fight against a rollback. And I think that we're seeing that in some areas, where people are not policing the line, they're not stopping offensive things because it wasn't intended. I think there's unintentional sexism that even if we shouldn't be branding anybody, we shouldn't be calling anyone bad, but the baggage of unintentional sexism exists, and we can respectfully address it without demonizing anybody, I would say. But I do agree with a lot of David's sentiment on that point.
I don't think I'm quite talking about like a genderless, colorblind utopia, because I actually do think that there is a lot of value looking forward in realizing the problems differences have caused in the past. More what I mean, by accepting and all that stuff is we can talk about it without it becoming incendiary.
Mm-hmm.
I think the comments on my column were a perfect example of that.
Yes.
That you had people swinging both ways, and you had people, in my opinion, who didn't even really need to read the column to know what they were going to say to it. All they needed to do was categorize it into feminists are good, or me saying feminists are good or feminists are bad. Whereas I wasn't even saying either one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that attitude that I feel is counterproductive. It's not that I think all men and women should see men and women exactly the same, and if we try to run a proposal saying that women should have a certain right because of this factor that's prevalent in women, that we shouldn't recognize that because we don't see gender anymore. I'm saying that some of the emotional attachment, that's what's wrong with it right now. And when you're emotionally charged with something, and if you're going out to find something, you will find it.
So I think that's actually a poignant point, because if I remember the direct quote, it was, a personal peeve of mine is when people think that I can't do manual labor, I'm an athlete. Would you say with certainty that that was an accusation of sexism, or might you have been sensitive to that point because of past experiences?
That's a great point. That's what I thought about when I read your article.
It's possible,
And yeah, I think some of the columns might have pointed it out, or maybe I got that from your column. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And that certainly is possible. I also know this person.
And moving forward, perhaps me making sure that you're not being, too sensitive, just as we can all make sure that nobody's demonizing or being too sensitive. It's all constructive debate to have moving forward for gender equality in general.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad that the three of us could come together today and have this talk. And I think we'd all be glad to be at Princeton, which has a lot of forward-thinking policies in this direction. Maternal and paternal leave for professors, for example. Anyway, thank you for watching, and we hope you join us again next
And
week.
we might have women next time.